Dobbiamo custodire il creato, è un dono che il Signore ci ha dato. Per noi, è il regalo di Dio a noi. Noi siamo custodi del creato.
The morning bird sings a sad song when the darkness turns to dawn. And though he sounds oh so sweet to me, he's singing about the field as he's waking me from my sleep. Hey there, sunshine, show your teeth. This winter weekends my wings. Hey there, sunshine, smile on me. It's dark and I'm starving for spring. The raven returns from the barren fields where the harvest is yet to yield. The fallow ground would not take the seed. There's still plenty of mouths to feed. And yet somehow he continues to sing. And yet somehow he continues to sing. Hey there, sunshine, show your teeth. It's winter weekends my wings. Hey there, sunshine, smile on me. It's dark and I'm starving for spring. Hey there, sunshine, show your teeth. It's winter weekends my wings. Hey there, sunshine, smile on me. It's dark and I'm starving for spring.
Back in the 70s, we'd go out boating and I'd jump in the water and I'd come out with the stained bathing suit. Dad, why is this so dirty, this water? And so that's what I started to get a feel for. I wanted to try to figure out what's causing the problems. And so that's really where my passion took off in trying to help the Bay.
I've been in love with the earth since I was a little girl, camping and being connected in a deep way to my surroundings.
This river, this is where I grew up. So this river is very important to me. I grew up 3 streets from here, and all these little waterfalls and rivers further uphill were rivers that I would play in as a kid. I would come down here.
I'm very tied to nature. I have children, and I, try and get them out in nature at every, at every opportunity I can, which is hard in today's day and age with electronics and school and all these other activities.
It's important for us to understand that we are part of our environment. I mean, we are tied to our environment, and our health and well-being is linked to our environment. Clean air and clean water are not just government objectives. They're things we all need to live and be happy.
There are a number of threats. There's all kinds of pollutants that we're putting into the air and water that impact children in the womb and young children especially. There's a much higher prevalence of autism around the world, in fact, and now because of some of these things, or at least the scientists are beginning to make those links.
In the Bay, we have fish health being degraded by different types of contaminants, and that's causing their reproductive systems to be compromised. They have cancerous tumors, and in some cases it's made them more susceptible to disease, and it's caused them to die.
But it's all related to our lifestyles of consuming too much energy and what that, especially fossil fuel energy, and what that does to the environment overall.
So many of the environmental problems that we have today come about because people are seeking from the world that which does not come from the world.
The first thing that we ought to acknowledge is that this is God's creation. It's not ours. We're simply here for a short time to make the world a better place. And that includes reaching out to our neighbors, but it also includes taking care of creation.
And he told us to subdue the earth. Well, he didn't mean to subdue it in a negative way, but he meant to manage the earth, to co-create with the earth, to use the God-given intelligence that we have to bring everything into harmony, because we were given this ability and now we're given this mission to harmonize our way of living with all of God's creatures.
We're not called to dominate the planet. It's a total misreading of Genesis. We're called to use our creative skills to better the planet and to pass it on to future generations.
Pope Francis has talked about the integral connection between care of creation and care of the human person.
I think he understands the environmental questions firsthand, because when he was the Cardinal Archbishop of Buenos Aires, he was working in many areas of the country where there was mining going on and where people were complaining about what the impacts of that had on their villages and their livelihoods and lifestyles. So he knows about the environment firsthand. So I think he's integrating some of that into his teaching. But he always brings it back to we need to do better because we are simply caretakers, and poor people are suffering because of our neglect.
Who's going to speak for the marginalized who are bearing the brunt of our stormwater pollution, or whose neighborhoods are oppressed with our plastic debris that's blowing around in the wind? Who's going to be the voice for them? Who's going to be the voice for the river? Who's going to be the voice for the future generations?
There is a moral obligation to maintain the health of our environment for all people, and oftentimes it's the poorest and most disadvantaged that suffer the most from poor environmental conditions.
When I realized how climate change would worsen the lives of the poor and also affect the beauty of our environment, where so many of us find peace and meet God, it became a real troubling question for me. I started to read about what faith communities were doing in response to this question, because this seemed to me to be a powerful spiritual challenge.
I went into environmental consulting after I graduated college, and would go around to industrial areas and do site visits and assessments, and I was beginning to really feel uncomfortable with the oppression, the environmental oppression in these urban neighborhoods. And one day I was at a stoplight on my way to a site visit, and this older man with a cane, probably homeless, crossed in front of my car, and I just sat there and I cried, and I said, I want to be working for him. I don't want to be working for the banks and the lawyers anymore. And so for me, the environment is about people, and I love people. And so I'm in here to fix the world for the people who can't do it and who need it most, and for future generations.
My question was, how can faith communities contribute to building a sustainable society?
We have found just great success with the faith community because they're a receptive audience. They're very open to the conversation. They're very open and eager to sponge in. How can we care more about creation?
It really is a part of what most houses of worship or institutions of faith really stand for. And so it's been a wonderful partnership with the Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake and other organizations here in the watershed to begin to try to find ways to really marry that protection of the environment effort with the institutions of faith.
We are a faith-based environmental advocacy group. We are organizing congregations and individual people of faith around clean water issues here in the Maryland and DC area. We will bring projects to congregations that they can implement on their grounds. We find that the barriers that congregations face to implementing new projects on their properties is they don't necessarily have the technical capacity to figure out what they want to do or where they want to put it, and they don't have the financial capacity.
Moving over the knowledge gap is thus the first thing. Secondly, even when people understand, it's often hard to care enough to make a difference in one's own life and one's own behavior.
And so what we'll do is we work with watershed groups like Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay or other smaller watershed groups that are very localized, and we put together basically the pieces of the project that make it easier for that congregation to implement it. A tree planting, a rain garden project. And so, for example, the tree planting program that we have right now is Trees for Sacred Places. And A congregation signs up, and what they receive is a free planting plan that is prepared by the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay. That's all native species, and they work with the people at the congregation to understand what their vision is for their grounds. We don't want to put in a forest in a place where they play soccer during their fall picnic. So we work with the congregation to implement this forest, this reforestation, within their own vision of their community.
When people see that their commitment to social justice requires new action for the environment, it leads them to make changes in their own lives.
And then our organization comes in and does like an educational and spiritual workshop to help contextualize the work. And all of that funding is something that we and that partner group like the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay, we go out and we secure that grant funding in advance because it's something we know how to do, and that helps the congregations overcome that financial barrier as well.
I would also urge communities and parishes to meet together to pray and to learn about the environment. The upcoming encyclical would be a wonderful occasion for parishes to gather, to pray and to act in response to Pope Francis's discussion of the environment.
My name is Father Richard BRETONE. I'm a priest of the Brooklyn Diocese, and I'm also an amazing adventurer. We're at Heaven's Embrace, this is the name of this property, for Eternal Flame of Hope Ministries. It's 46 acres. We're in the lower Catskill Mountains near Barryville, where they do the whitewater rafting down the Delaware River. We try to bring people more into our connection with nature. This waterfall is a symbol that reminds us of God's flowing graces in our lives. The water flows from the waterfall into a pool. The pool is symbolic of our soul, and the water is symbolic of God's graces. And in that way, I wanted to create a symbolic place of prayer and invite people to come and adore the Lord in the tabernacle, in a special place of nature. And the place that was closest to my heart is a natural waterfall. So we have this a really beautiful location, and with that, I've gone about creating, with the help of volunteers and donations, this incredible property with many trails, with many statues, many shrines. We have Stations of the Cross that I created with the students at Pratt, and we have 14 original stations that we hand-painted, and a mile trail throughout the woods. And this beautiful chapel, I built a wooden model, and I took this wooden model to an architect, and we drew a plan. And from that plan, we created this chapel. All the wood that's on the interior of the chapel grew here. The dark wood is ash wood. Ash trees grew here. All the ceiling is maple wood. The maple trees grew here. And by living in harmony with nature, we have a way of reorientating ourselves with a deep peace. And I've had people just sit in the chapel and just look out, and they're looking out, but they're looking at the Lord too. And they're starting to see that this is really about their relationship with God, a God who creates beauty like this. We try to live with the resources God has given us. God willing, when we build the retreat house, we'll use geothermal heating, which uses the heat in the ground. We'll use solar panels, which use the energy of the sun. We'll also use wood-burning fireplaces that are 95 to 99% efficient. And we'll use the wood that's God's given us that's fallen to the ground and now becomes a fuel for us. We want to build an organic garden here, and we want to start to grow vegetables and invite people from the city to learn how to do organic gardening. And I would love to have people sit and pray in a dialogue with the Lord, from the Eucharist to their heart and their heart back to Him. And in this context, they can be finally away from the cacophony and noises of the city. They can be away from the confinement of the city. One day we had a beautiful eagle drinking from the waterfall. We have the deer from the waterfall. We're in harmony, and when we're in harmony with nature, we become more peaceful within ourselves.
At Audubon, we cite this statistic that says that 47 million Americans identify themselves as bird lovers or bird watchers. But it goes far beyond that, because everyone, I think, has, no one dislikes birds.
Well, there's that rare, moment,
Yeah.
I opened a gallery here in Harlem about 8 months ago, and I thought it would be really interesting to pay tribute to John James Audubon, who's buried about 7 blocks from the gallery in Trinity Cemetery, by asking a few artists to paint birds on roll-down gates.
Well, my next door neighbor is a fine artist, and when he heard about the idea, he said, "You've got to get in touch with my next door neighbor, Mark Janot. He's the vice president of content at the National Audubon Society," and they just came out with this study that says that half of all North American bird species are threatened by climate change. So you should do those species. And then we all got together and I said, maybe you should do not just choose from those species, but do all 314 birds that are threatened by climate change. And Avi said,
Sure,
I don't know what I'm
to do."
getting into here, but okay. And thus the Audubon Mural Project was born. Our vision is to paint the murals from maybe 125th Street all the way up to the George Washington Bridge, centered on this area, Hamilton Heights and Washington Heights, because first of all, John James Audubon spent the last 10 years of his life living on the Hudson, just a few blocks north of here.
Our plan is to paint all 314 birds.
314 species.
We've asked them to look at Audubon's original drawings and to look at photographs of the birds themselves, or study the birds, on the trees if they will. But we really want them to bring their own interpretation. We want it to be artistic. We don't just want it to be scientific.
I don't associate birds with this neighborhood, but frankly, I think that that's kind of the point. Like, it brings something that's very legitimately core to the DNA of the Audubon Society and of our work and advocating for birds to an entirely new audience. It feels very fresh and vital and vibrant. It feels artistic. It's beautiful.
Well, the project is multifaceted. It is about bringing awareness to climate change and how that affects birds, but it's also about creating a pride in a part of Manhattan where I'm originally from, and I would say is often neglected by people. So it's really been a thrill to see how excited people in the neighborhood have been in seeing these birds pop up here and there. So, there are a lot of things that we're trying to accomplish here.
The notion of catalyzing, a neighborhood and ultimately, I think, kind of a city in a way that delights them and then does sort of, draw their attention to this issue in a way that is both, kind of beautiful and not, beating them on the head with this negative message, but kind of delighting them and then making them realize that this is an issue that they have to or ought to care about. They're light, they're beautiful, they are so varied and have such extraordinary, beautiful plumage and everything, and to hear that half of birds are threatened by global warming, I think, is something that really catches people and makes them feel, a much more visceral sense of the kind of horror of that. There are many, many species that are not on anyone's conservation watch list. I mean, the wood duck, which our friend, the artist Boy Kong, is painting for Audubon's gala tomorrow night, is a species that feels like it's very abundant, and yet and many of Canada geese and mallards and things like that, and even you don't think of them as being at risk, I think. And then there are things like the Baltimore Oriole. Even if it survives, may not be surviving in Maryland. It may actually have to shift outside of Maryland. Or the common loon, which is the state bird of Minnesota, may no longer be making its haunting cry on the lakes of Minnesota. And so there are those sorts of things that are kind of, chilling to realize.
It's interesting. I wouldn't say that I felt a particular kinship with birds before the project has started, and that has fast changed. But one of the things I noticed early on, before I read the biographies of Audubon and started buying Field Guide to Birds, which has been happening slowly over the last couple of months, I was surprised at how enthusiastic everybody is to the project, because what I've learned is everybody loves birds. Not everybody loves dogs. Not everybody loves cats, but very few people have any issue with birds. People love birds. I love them all. I don't know what to say.
I have a favorite bird. I have a new favorite bird like every week. My favorite bird now is the cedar waxwing, which is my favorite bird for a kind of sad reason. I was at a meeting out in California in a room that had big glass walls, and a cedar waxwing smashed right into the wall and plummeted to its death, sadly. And then a conservationist who was there was able to pick it up and really show us these little waxy tipped wings that gave it its name, and it was so beautiful as she was holding it. Seeing it, die, and also seeing it up close really sort of touched my heart.
We'd love for people to help support the project. That means landlords and store owners who will give us space on which to paint. We're always happy for funding, and we're always happy for artists to volunteer to come and help us execute the project.
If you go to audubonmuralproject.org, you'll see the murals themselves, and you'll get links to our climate site, which is also at climate.audubon.org.
The Chesapeake's the largest estuary in the U.S.
Yeah, the Chesapeake Bay watershed is massive. It's 64,000 square miles, about 44 million acres, stretches from up in Cooperstown, New York, all the way down to Norfolk, Virginia, west to the Shenandoahs and the Appalachian Mountains, and then all the way to Delaware on the eastern side. So 6 states plus the District of Columbia are part of the watershed. And it's really important that they all be involved in implementing initiatives that are going to help to restore the bay.
The coastline of the bay is actually longer than the whole west coast of the United States. It's almost 10,000 miles long.
What happens in Pennsylvania, New York, New England is really all part of very similar riverine systems, so we are all part of it.
It's really what we do on the land is what determines the health of the bay, and so everybody's really a part of that.
Well, 100 years ago, the bay was in much better condition than it is today. There was abundant fish and wildlife. There was more forests and wetlands and open space for people to use. Then after World War II, people started moving into the watershed, and really 3 big things happened. One is we had more sewage from the people who lived here then. We had a lot more agriculture. And back in the 60s and 70s, we started applying more fertilizers and pesticides to the land. And while they helped the crops, they did harm fish and wildlife from that runoff.
Nutrient and chemical runoff from the land, so essentially from our urban areas, from agriculture. It's really over-enrichment of nutrients that is causing algae blooms in the bay and degrading its health.
And then lastly, with all the building we had, we started to lose the forests that are around here that we see, as well as wetlands, and they act as sponges and filters to trap pollutants.
As we begin to really develop and pave over paradise with a parking lot, we are increasing this source of polluted runoff in all of our rivers and streams.
And that comes from everywhere. So it comes from all of our rivers and streams, hundreds of, thousands of miles of river and stream that are really the circulatory system for this bay. So it's really kind of keeping them healthy eventually keeps the bay healthy. We have a long way to go to restore our rivers. I mean, this is a very much lived-in watershed, is like I like to say. We have 17 million people living in this watershed.
It's a degraded estuary. In fact, it's only about 30% of the level we want it to be. And so we have poor water quality. Each summer we have fish kills. That's because there's not enough oxygen in the water. We've lost a lot of the wetlands, so about 1 million different waterfowl winter here each year, but where they can land and the food they have is limited. And in some cases, it's unsafe to swim because of high bacteria levels.
Recently, EPA released its latest figures showing that close to 55% of our waterways in the U.S. were in poor condition, or in degraded condition. Only about 20% were really in good to excellent condition or considered healthy.
Recreational fishery is a huge industry here. So if we start losing some of the striped bass or crabs or even the freshwater fish that people depend on, that starts to hurt the economy as well as harming the fish and wildlife themselves.
The Alliance for Chesapeake Bay's mission is to lead, support, and inspire local action that will restore and protect the Chesapeake Bay and its rivers.
The U.S. Geological Survey really tries to understand the bay ecosystem, but then we use that for decision making so we can try to improve water quality or bring back conditions for fish and wildlife. So some of our big projects, there's a large effort to try to reduce nutrients going into the bay because that's what causes the fish kills each summer. So we monitor all the rivers to see if those levels are coming down as management practices are being put in. We also look at chemical contaminants and how they affect fish health.
The Alliance is unique because it is really focused on getting people involved, building stewardship at the local level, and really kind of taking action broadly across the watershed. We are not an organization that litigates or lobbies. What we try to do is build the capacity of local groups to do a better job and help local governments kind of fulfill their obligations.
A hydrologist really studies water and the pollutants that are picked up by the water. So we look at where the water comes from, whether it's farms or cities, and the pollutants that are in it, how they get into streams and eventually seep down to rivers and something like the Chesapeake Bay where they can cause harm.
Over 7,000 miles of stream in this watershed have had their forests, their riparian forests replanted, most of those on agricultural land. All of those actions are starting to restore those stream ecosystems. We've gone in and removed the barriers to fish migration on thousands of miles of stream in this watershed so that fish can once again have be able to get to their natural grounds.
Why people in New York would care is what we are doing on the land to improve the bay, first will improve your local streams. So what we're doing in those areas are going to make those streams safer to swim in, as well as make the fish safer to catch and eat.
Planting new forests in urban areas, conserving the forests we have is a very important objective to us. Protecting and restoring our rivers and streams, a lot of our focus is on stormwater because it is the fastest growing source of pollution to the Chesapeake Bay right now. And a lot of our work is in communities, really helping communities kind of take action on their own to reduce stormwater from individual residences and businesses to the infrastructure that's in our urban areas. And we do that with green approaches, approaches that really integrate the biology into stormwater management. And then third is really we're all about supporting and building the capacity of our partners. So we work with a broad diversity of people, businesses. We have a program, Businesses for the Bay, where we're trying to get businesses committed to actions for the Bay, local governments, watershed groups, citizen groups, because we really believe it's going to take all of us to really make a difference. We need regulations that prevent new problems from occurring and hold accountable those who have made the improvements to maintain them over time.
If you didn't have wastewater operators, you wouldn't have civilization. It's really that simple. It sounds like an overstatement, but it's true. Because civilization from the very earliest ages realized that you have to do something with human waste. You have to do something with the polluted water that we use. Otherwise, we foul our own drinking water, our own food supply, our own lives. So this is the Fields Point Wastewater Treatment Facility. It is the largest wastewater treatment facility in Rhode Island, operated by the Narragansett Bay Commission. And here's where we are. Providence River, which comes down from downtown Providence, which comes straight down, and it opens up and it becomes Narragansett Bay. Well, this is so important to the waters of the state. We all grow up in Rhode Island, we all go to the beach, we all fish, people shellfish, and they work as the wastewater operators. So we all get it. So you've got 45 million gallons of wastewater coming into this plant. A lot of it's coming underground. It's going through successive levels of treatment. And in just a little bit, we'll see it in the surface area where you can see some of the treatment taking place. A wastewater treatment plant is really just a series of different types of treatment that take human waste, wastewater, industrial waste, commercial waste, it's all blended together, and it provides the successive areas of treatment that use gravity, biological treatment, some chemicals, so that what we return to nature is sometimes almost cleaner than what the water that it's going into. And it's a complex system that takes an existing aeration system and sort of triples the ability of how much nutrients it can remove, because the goal is to protect the Providence River and Narragansett Bay. And now we give it some quiet time so it can settle out, and any of the solids that are still in it, which are very active biologically, can settle out. And then so from here, we add disinfection, just to make sure we kill anything that's nasty. And then out in the water it goes. It's an expensive process. It requires highly trained operators to do it, and most people don't even know that it happens. And that's really what we struggle with, is making sure people know where their sewer rates go, where their tax money goes. It goes into this infrastructure, operating and maintaining it, making sure we have qualified professionals who do this work, so that that water is protected, so that our shellfishing industry is protected, so that our beaches are protected, so that our public health is protected. As an environmental regulator, one of the things that we're charged to do is to help the community understand the importance of protecting the environment. One of the reasons I love working at my department at the state of Rhode Island is because the people there care about the environment, so they will do what they can do in any way to help people understand and to ennoble people and to encourage people and to support people who are also trying to protect the environment. Here we have one set of tanks, which you'll see down below, which are the secondary tanks for conventional treatment. And then all of that gets pumped up with those pumps you just saw downstairs to this set of tanks, so we can do more of the removal of nutrients, which is very important because this water goes into a very small watershed, the river of the Patuxent River. So it comes in from the community, it gets treated once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, soon to be 5 times, disinfected, and then it goes back out to the river. So the town of West Warwick will take what we used to discharge to the waters of the state and clean it even more to remove nitrogen and ammonia and all those types of chemicals. And now with the construction that we see further down, they'll be adding another process. And all of this is based on what is the river telling us. As we're listening to the river, the science is showing us how wildlife responds, how the river responds to all of the life that's around us. And we have to make sure that the water that we discharge is cleaned to an important enough level and a good enough level so it doesn't impact nature. This is what it's all about, is all the water that we flush and use and throw down our sinks and everything we throw down gets cleaned. All of that's removed. We use all the systems of nature, gravity, biological systems, whatever, to clean the water that was given to us that we use so that we can return it back to nature.
Even now today, when you go into the headworks where this water comes in and it's bluish gray with all kinds of, things floating around in it. And to come out here and to see it here, and actually to see it in the lab when we take a sample of our effluent every morning, and just to see how it's crystal clear. It's almost drinkable at this point.
Clearly the biggest threat to human thriving on the planet is climate change.
But one of the misconceptions about climate change is confusing it with weather. Weather determines what I'm going to wear today. Am I going to bring an umbrella? Am I going to wear a heavy jacket? Climate is, what kind of clothes am I going to have in the closet for the next 3 months?
Climate change is happening now due to the retention of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. This is a complicated reality that can be hard to follow, and many of us have different levels of interest in science or different things we understand about it.
And people confuse that because they'll think that the past few weeks were cold, so therefore if it's cold, there can't be global warming.
But the facts are that 14 out of the past 15 years have been the warmest years on record.
We look at the global averages, We look at global carbon dioxide levels. We look at global average temperatures. That tells us the story. And again, climate relates to trends, not day-to-day changes.
So we know that this is happening, and it's a result of industrial processes, the consumption of fossil fuels and greenhouse gases that stay in the atmosphere and warm it. And it has many trickle-down effects for the global ecosystem.
What climate change really means is that all of the fossil fuels that we use generate carbon dioxide and other gases. And there's a rampant amount of carbon dioxide going into the atmosphere now because of all of the cars and all of the industries and everything that we do that uses fossil fuels.
The problem with climate change, and especially with CO2 emissions, is you can't really see them. It's an invisible gas that is trapping more heat into the atmosphere, which is raising temperatures and creating these wild fluctuations in our weather patterns that we hadn't seen before.
That carbon dioxide becomes like a blanket in the atmosphere. The atmosphere has carbon dioxide in it. It's supposed to absorb and maintain a certain level of heat. But now it's out of control. And the concern is that as there's more carbon dioxide and there's more heat in the atmosphere that gets maintained, the atmosphere is going to be holding more moisture and will be shifting weather patterns, or could be melting ice caps. Will change the migration patterns of birds.
We're right in the middle of the Atlantic flyway, so we get a large variety. There's about 29 different waterfowl species, black ducks, mallards, and then there's a large amount of additional water birds that utilize the bay.
Well, our science team, led by our chief scientist, Gary Langham, spent 6 years crunching data using citizen science, Christmas bird counts, and breeding bird surveys, and combining it with climate data to create a model where they understood what climate each bird species needs to live, essentially. And then they projected forward into future scenarios, and what they found is that those climate ranges are, for half of the species, are either shifting so dramatically or contracting or both, that the species themselves are threatened. Their very survival will be threatened in this century if we don't do something.
It causes more intense storms, it causes heat waves and droughts. It can change the ecosystems where animals live, altering their behavior patterns, their migration. It affects people's health and well-being.
At the Maryland Department of Natural Resources, we deal with addressing climate change on two fronts. One is we want to make sure we're doing what we can to help stem the drivers of climate change. So either reducing carbon emissions or trying to sequester carbon in our atmosphere through our natural resources, through our forestry stock or through our wetlands. But we also have a whole suite of programs aimed at helping the state and its citizens, as well as our natural resources, better adapt or be more resilient to the impacts of climate change that we're seeing today, but that we're very concerned are going to intensify in the future.
The Catholic Climate Covenant formed in 2006, and it was really a way for the Catholic bishops for us to help the Catholic bishops get their message out on climate change. They had written a statement on climate change in 2001. We're a network of networks, so there's lots of different other Catholic organizations that are part of our network, such as the Bishops' Conference for one, the Department of Justice, Peace and Human Development, and Migration and Refugee Services. Catholic Relief Services is another major partner, Catholic Health Association of the United States, Catholic Charities USA.
Climate change is a reality that Catholics recognize. More Catholics recognize the reality of climate change than other groups of Christians, as a recent study that polled American Christians found out. 80% of Catholics are concerned about climate change, know that it's happening, and want to do something about it. 80% of Catholics want to see increased funding for renewable energy. So there's a trust in science, a recognition that these are realities that scientists and engineers can tell us about and give us solutions for. And that's something that is also affirmed by our Vatican Pontifical Council on Justice and Peace and the Pontifical Academies of Science, which have researched the problem of climate change specifically and issued several extremely informative and authoritative reports drawing on international scientists.
We also need to talk about renewable energy, using more solar, more wind, geothermal. I was in Rome in May for a meeting at the Pontifical Academy of Sciences and Social Sciences. And it was led off by Cardinal Rodriguez. And the line that stuck with me from his talk was this notion that we are technical giants, but ethical children. And what he was trying to say is that we have all of this technology, and yet we haven't really thought about whether we should use that technology or how we should use that technology. So we need to begin to think more clearly about what is the right thing to do with this technology, not just use it because it's there. So for example, we know for instance that that we're dumping too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And fossil fuels have been a wonderful thing. They've raised the standard of living for all of us, certainly in the United States and many other countries. But now we know that it's creating a situation that is totally unsustainable in terms of the planet. So what are we to do about that? What are the ethical choices that need to be made to ratchet back the amount of CO2 we're putting in the atmosphere and perhaps using renewable fuels and such?
Climate change is a little bit more of a complicated issue, I think, in terms of the health of the bay ecosystem itself. I'd say we're still a little uncertain about all the impacts that climate are going to have, but there are two really key elements that are at work right now. The biggest one, of course, is sea level rise, which does start to eliminate some of our coastal wetlands, increases shoreline erosion, and causes quite a bit of, wreaks havoc with a lot of development, obviously, that's close to the shore. And then, beyond that, it's really what seems to be an increasing percentage of high intensity, storms that produce a lot of runoff from this landscape. So those are really, in terms of a changing climate, probably the things that are of most concern to us right now.
We're very lucky in Rhode Island because we have an organization, my sister organization, called the Coastal Resources Management Council. They obviously deal with the coast. And there's some great scientists in that organization and that they work with that are studying this level of sea level rise and the impact that storms will have on that.
In 2014, Maryland passed legislation through our Maryland General Assembly to create a CoSmart Council. And the CoSmart Council has the authority to actually issue specific criteria for how and where we build structures within areas that may be vulnerable to sea level rise over the next 100 years.
And I was very surprised in the early days of my understanding this issue to find out that in Rhode Island, in Narragansett Bay, sea level has risen over 9 inches from the 1930s to today.
A number of scientific bodies have put forth projections for how much sea level rise we can anticipate in the next 50, 100 years in the mid-Atlantic region and in Maryland. And so the projections range anywhere from 1.4 feet in the next 50 years to almost 6 feet in the year 2100.
Climate change causes the seas to become warmer, and when they're warmer, they expand and rise. Also, the melting of ice creates a greater volume in the seas, so that's another cause of rising sea levels.
The changes can be very gradual. They can be sort of inundation or submergence of low-lying lands and changes in our marsh ecosystems. Slowly over time, marshes are becoming inundated and marshes are transitioning, up farther onto the landscape. We're also seeing, continuation of sort of a steady rate of shoreline erosion throughout the Chesapeake Bay and along coastal regions on our outer coast and throughout the mid-Atlantic.
Then more intense storms happen because of the warmer temperatures. There's more water vapor above the storm. And when a storm comes in, it is more powerful because there's more water vapor in the air and more impact of the increased rain and winds upon the shore.
So we're seeing impacts of a warmer ocean. We're seeing impacts of melting glaciers, melting ice caps. And that's having an impact because that 9 inches can translate to much more as a storm comes up with storm surge.
That's what happened, obviously, during Hurricane Sandy. Really showcased, the rate of sea level rise, or how an increase in sea level can exacerbate or heighten the amount of storm surge that can affect a community on any given day.
So it doesn't mean that any particular storm is a unique expression of climate change, just that the storms that happen are more intense. And with Hurricane Sandy, we in this region saw incredible devastation in Brooklyn, in New Jersey, the homes that were washed away, people who were made into environmental refugees right here in New York is something we'll remember.
Environmental regulators and scientists use all these fancy terms for a rainstorm. A rain event is a rainstorm. In 2010, we actually had 2 floods. The conditions were set perfectly for flooding because of a warmer late winter, a saturated groundwater, a series of small rain events, and then we had 2 back-to-back series of sequential rain events. The second one, of course, creating catastrophic historic flooding, where the Patuxent River, where 2 of wastewater facilities are located, crested to 20.7 feet, which is like 6 feet over anything we'd seen prior to that. And then before that, the greatest historical event that we had was 2 weeks prior to that. So we had 2 back-to-back historic rain events and flooding events. Yeah.
That's where the water was?
Oh, the tree.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's right above.
Right above the fence where it broke, and you can see the difference in the color.
Yep.
That's how high it was over there.
Yep. And
yeah, it was,
the water, to say this is, it was.
I want to say probably somewhere around here.
Yeah. Probably just below the.
Yeah, we're just below the bottom of the bridge.
And there were plastic bags everywhere along all the trees. The Patuxent River Authority staged cleanups to come along and clean up all the plastic bags and other debris that the river had just surged through, and it got caught up on tree branches. Yeah. So what happens is, because wastewater treatment facilities and collection systems and pump stations are built at low levels, because you want water to flow down to it cheaply, and use gravity to do that, and then you treat it there before it goes back to nature, they're very susceptible to flooding. So we lost 2 wastewater treatment facilities to flooding, completely inundated, as well as a series of other pump stations. So as you can see, you've got this water level, and you've got this equipment. Well, the floods that we had in 2010 were what we would refer to as 500-year floods, and we weren't expecting them. And now we're wondering if that is the new normal, if we might see sudden rain events that could simulate that exact scenario where you get that type of flooding occurring in areas that are continually built up. It's not just necessarily the rainfall, but what we hear from the National Weather Service is when they do their modeling of river areas, it's also the way the development has gone. Malls, highways, and that prevents the river from doing what it wants to do, especially in a flood. The government in general has the responsibility to understand all of this if it's making investments that are going to last 20, 30, 40 years. Because if the sea level is really rising and storm surge is really going to be that much more of a problem, then we need to start thinking about that now.
We're trying to work with nature and use natural solutions to help protect our communities and our economy and our environment from impacts. So there are a lot of natural solutions to combat climate change on the mitigation side, such as planting trees and sequestering carbon within our wetland systems. But on the adaptation side, or building resilience to climate change impacts, you can also use nature as well. And so you can build dunal systems. Beach nourishment is a natural solution. Wetland, so sort of increasing vegetated or wetland buffers in front of a coastal development. That's a natural solution that can help control or reduce coastal flood impacts.
If the Providence River ever decides that it wants to come up into the plant, it's designed so that on certain levels of storm surge and maybe even sea level rise, that the plant can handle a flooding situation. About a year ago, I was approached by Providence College because they were looking for someone to help teach a sustainability course. Besides bringing the real-world environmental issues that an environmental regulator would know, I also bring the theology to it. Why the church teaches what it teaches. What does the church teach? What are the popes saying? Those types of things.
Our tradition on caring for creation goes back about 3,400 years to Genesis, to the writers of Genesis. and Earth Day is only 40, 45 years old. So we go back quite a bit further.
The church by its nature is pro-ecology, is pro-environment, because we teach that the Word of God became flesh. Jesus Christ, the Word of God, entered into creation, left the glory of heaven to become an embryo, to gestate for 9 months, to be born into the world, to be physical. And he would use water, and he would use bread and wine, the fruits of the earth, to continue his presence in the world. That's fascinating. So the sacramental aspect of our faith automatically makes us pro-creation, pro-environment. The fact that we say that the Word of God, God himself, entered into creation, obviously takes creation and elevates it and makes it this noble reality that we are called to protect, if for no other reason, because of that.
This has always been part of our tradition, to care for creation, to meet God within creation. We have, I think, in many ways forgotten about that.
It's a moral obligation to consider how our actions affect others and what we can do to build a more sustainable, a more just, and a more healthy ecology and economy.
Really beginning with St. John Paul II, there's been a much greater awareness about environmental harms and environmental issues, and much greater call to action, or I guess I would say call to integrate our faith more fully into, to reflect this ancient teaching.
Pope John Paul II had written a beautiful letter, a World Day of Peace message.
And it laid out all kinds of things that we need to be doing better in terms of how we care for God's creation, the impacts of our neglect of creation has, particularly on poor people, but also on the rest of God's creation.
We have the treasure of the magisterial statements on the environment that are part of the body of Catholic social teaching. And an important document was written by the United States bishops in 1981 that specifically reflected on energy.
Pope Benedict XVI made very clear the theology of why we are environmentalists.
And early on, in fact, in his inaugural homily, he began to break out this notion of human ecology and natural ecology, and saying that they're one, that we can't treat nature in such a way and not have that impact our human spiritual life.
Why it's important from a justice issue, why it's important because we love our neighbors.
He was known as the Green Pope. He's the one who put the solar array on the Paul VI Center, Conference Center at the Vatican. You know, he's planted, was donated a plot of land to plant trees to offset the carbon that the Vatican was producing. So I think it's the first carbon neutral state in the world. Now it's a pretty small state, but we'll give him credit.
It's the life of the church now. We've had 2 popes carry it forward. We have bishops, conferences of bishops, the laity. It's the life of the church. It's who we are.
So we have examined energy issues and tried to suggest ways that, rooted in Catholic social teaching, emphasize the good of the human person, just access to energy, and healthy economic and technical systems that can create a sustainable society.
And certainly Pope Francis is carrying on the continuity of what St. John Paul II and Benedict XVI said, doing something that most environmentalists may not get, which is interweaving what it means to be human and human dignity with the environmental issues of the day.
And if we're caring about all of nature, then we have to care about the human person, number one.
And our duties towards the environment are linked to our duties towards the human person. So Pope Francis is saying, we are in a culture that just mindlessly, and I'm part of that culture, throws things away. And we may not think about what we're throwing away. And I think the beauty of a statement like human ecology and a culture of waste is that it unites these concepts. So the dignity of the human person is now united to environmental protection. It brings all people together. It's sort of like we're standing in a chapel right now. The Mass is about bringing all people together.
If we're going to be an environmental church, we're going to be a pro-life church also.
All points of view come together. So whether you're a die-hard environmentalist and may not think about issues of human dignity, abortion or whatever, and whether you're on the front lines of those battles and you may not think about the environment, What the popes are trying to do, what Pope Francis is trying to do, what Benedict tried to do, what St. John Paul II tried to do, is spread a wide net, spread a wide table to invite all people, because these issues are so united.
This may not be impacting you right now, the climate change issue, but it certainly will impact your children and your grandchildren. So in that way, it's very much a life issue. It's about these future generations. What kind of a planet are we leaving to them? None of us would trash our house if we were going to give it to our children or our grandchildren, would we? Well, we're doing the same thing to the planet. So what can we do as people of faith, secure in our faith, knowing that there are environmental groups out there that think that it would be much better if the human being was just out of the way. That's not who we are. We know that. So why get worked up about that? Let's live it. Let's counter that with a message of authenticity and authentic living as Catholics. And let's not get caught up in the partisan politics of it all.
There's somebody probably working in your neighborhood to work on the environment where you live. And we always say the best thing is, do something yourself. Change one of your behaviors. Do something that you can control.
So there's lots of things you can do in your own home. In the summer, turn the thermostat up, so you're not cooling the house unduly. In the winter, you turn the thermostat down, put another sweater on. There's a lot of great new technologies out there that can save money. LED light bulbs or compact fluorescent light bulbs are a couple of those technologies.
Planting native plants in your backyard or in your window boxes in the neighborhood to ensure that these birds have the appropriate habitat in the areas that they live in and migrate through.
Maybe transportation, you could perhaps walk more or bike or take public transportation, combine trips, so if you have to use the car.
Beauty in our environment, some have said, beauty is the greatest motivator. I mean, the reality is, we are healthier mentally, spiritually when we are in nature and when we're in beautiful environments.
We can understand the Creator better by understanding creation. If we look around us at creation, at nature, at the cycles of nature, at the beauty of nature, at the truth of nature, at the laws of nature, we get a better understanding of what made nature, which is God.
There's a wonderful quote by Wendell Berry, "Do unto those downstream as you'd have those upstream do unto you," which we think sums it up.
We have to go about building a safer planet with a lot of things in mind. So, for example, if we do move rapidly to renewable energy, what does that do to the people who are drilling for oil or mining for coal? That's going to displace them. And the Catholic bishops, again, at the public policy level, they're saying that there has to be a way to help those people and to hold those people harmless. So perhaps there's a rebate to them, an energy tax rebate or something like that.
The Church's role in the world is not to dictate, but to baptize, to ennoble, to share the goodness of the gospel, to share the good news of Jesus Christ, to share and to spread the grace of God, so that people's hearts can then choose on their own to make the right decisions.
As an organization that works on the environment and climate change full-time within the Catholic Church, we're enormously excited about the Pope's encyclical. What I hope doesn't happen is that it doesn't divide the country anymore, and especially Catholics, but I hope it unites. This is a pastoral statement, it's not a political statement. It's the Pope applying old teaching to a new problem. I hope we see it as a spiritual document and not a program. He's doing this because of his deep, abiding concern, not just of creation, but of those most impacted by our environmental neglect, which are the poor and the vulnerable.
So all Catholics can be very proud of the leadership that he's presenting and personally inspired to follow what he's calling us to do, to see the protection of the human person and the creation as a reciprocal process, as something that invites us to express love of neighbor in this concrete reality of today and be part of building a sustainable and beautiful economy and creation which reflects the abundance God wants the earth to have for all of us.
For a scientist, for an engineer, and a person of faith, I see, as the Church Catechism teaches so nicely, faith and reason are not opposed to each other, they come together. They're meant to teach us about the divine and the human from different perspectives. So whether I'm looking at something scientifically or I'm looking at something through the eyes of faith, creation is good no matter which way I look at it. It is beautiful no matter which way I look at it. It is true no matter which way I look at it. But I'm looking at it from two different perspectives, because not any one perspective can get you exactly where you need to be.